is Sue Mathewson from
Common Man for Ukraine.
Common Man for Ukraine. Yeah. So I'm very excited about this program to hear all about it. So welcome to the Gilford Library.
Thank you so much. I'm not dangerous.
Nobody sits in the front.
And our biggest problem is I could talk about this all night long, and so I want to have a respect for your time. How long of a segment are we expecting? 20 minutes, half an hour?
Usually we have an hour.
Fantastic.
Like 45 and then questions and answers over.
Fantastic. Great.
Yes.
How many have been to a Common Man family of restaurants? Restaurant, yes, okay. And so you know my dear friend Alex Ray, and he's a key part of this story. It's a wonderful story. First of all, this whole project is a project of the Plymouth Rotary Foundation out of Plymouth, New Hampshire. We filed a DBA called Common Man for Ukraine. We felt that projected who we are and what we do a little bit better, and it also paid respect to Alex's leadership role in our project. So the bombs started falling in February of 2022. We all remember that, and Putin, of course, predicted it would be 3 days. Remember that? The 3-day war. And we didn't know if that was true, but Alex is a dear friend, his partner Lisa. Steve Rand is my partner, Rand's Hardware. Anybody a big fan? Hardware store in Plymouth. And myself are sitting around the coffee shop in Plymouth like you all do here in Gilford or nearby. And we just were incredulous as what was happening. A young democratic country being bombed. And you all saw, as we did, those videos, news reports of millions of elderly and women and very young children carrying whatever they could carry and cramming onto those train platforms, right? Mm-hmm. It was World War II over again, and we were just heartbroken. And so we were sitting thinking, well, we have to do something, and that's Alex. If you know Alex, you know he's a wonderful businessman. That's a given. He's a great philanthropist, and he's a wonderful humanitarian. And the secret, you might also know, is that he's crazy. He's absolutely crazy in the most wonderful way. And this is what he said that day. He said, we can do something. And that there's millions of people all over the United States who also want to help, but they don't know how. That writing a check to some big organization and having it go to glossy flyers or stuffing people's mailboxes and how much actually went to the ground, he just didn't want to do that. So he said, I think if we put all of our good intentions together, little bits at a time, we can make something really big happen. So if we pull people together, we'll make a difference. But what do we need? What do they need, and how can we help? So he said, let's go to Ukraine. Well, that's crazy, right? Let's go to Ukraine. There's a war happening. Putin is bombing the country. I'm just a mom in late middle age. Like, are you crazy? He was right. And that's what we ended up doing. So what happened was, Alex is a Rotary Club member, and so is Steve Rand. And they said to themselves, well, Rotary's an international organization. Surely they're doing something. So Steve called they call them district governors, the district governor for all the Rotary clubs in Poland and the district governor for all the Rotary clubs in Ukraine. And they said, hi, we're from the United States. We're just 4 friends, and we have a pledge from Alex for $1 million as a match. If we can raise the match, we'll have $2 million. We want to help you help the people of Ukraine. We don't know what projects you need or how we can help, so we're coming to Ukraine. Oh. So we had tickets to arrive 3 days later, and we told them that. We're going to be there in 3 days. So you can imagine the Googling that went on to see who is Alex Ray in New Hampshire, who is Steve Rand, who's Susan Matheson. And when we got there, we were welcomed by the district governor of Poland and of Ukraine and the presidents of 16 Rotary clubs. And this was the meeting that the evening we arrived in Warsaw, that first late winter of 2022. Can't fly into Ukraine, right? You have to fly into Poland or someplace else and then cross the border. So these 16 club presidents went around the room and they presented to us their ideas of how they were going to help Ukrainian refugees and in Poland and internally displaced people in Ukraine. And remember, Putin said the war was going to be really short. So the projects they had in mind were all small and short in duration. Let's buy a bunch of first aid kits. Let's buy tourniquets. Let's buy some blankets. But you know, we thought the war wasn't going to last that long. And we said, okay, those sound like good projects, but Alex being Alex said, nope, we've got to go into Ukraine. I want to see with my own eyes what Ukraine needs, what the people are going to tell us, and then we can bring those stories back to the United States and get that other million match. So, if you believe in divine providence, it followed us. So if you're going to decide to provide humanitarian aid to a war zone, you can do a lot of things. You could put a new roof on a convent. You could repair bombed out cars. You could provide long underwear to soldiers. Like lots of things you could do. But we needed to find a focus, do one thing, and do one thing really, really well. And so what we decided was we looked at the numbers. And we found out that there's 2.5 million internally displaced children in Ukraine. That number has remained kind of constant, even though you saw that exodus in the beginning of the war. Just for fun, you should know, 6 million refugees went into Poland right there in the beginning, all those trains you saw. 4 million of them have returned to Ukraine. It's home. They want to be home. So the number of internally displaced children, kids who are hiding in safe houses, orphanages, staying in group homes, that number is still about 2.5 million internally displaced children. Now Ukraine had a really great social service network before the war. They had very good schools, exceptional services for children with disabilities, really progressive education system. But when you take 2.5 million kids who each need a bed, food, forks, spoons, cups, soccer balls, and a place to learn, it crashed the system because their budget is getting sucked up by the war. And so we figured out that this was the void we could fill. We could start feeding these kids, keeping them warm, and providing them love. So we settled on two main projects. The first is food and supply convoys. So we have partnered with Rotary clubs in Poland and all throughout Europe. We ran a warehouse in Chelm, Poland. I shouldn't say that town because we kind of keep it kind of on the down low because we don't want it to be bombed by anybody. We have a warehouse in Poland and we buy tons and tons of food, and we've delivered about 3,000 tons of food to kids in safe houses and frontline villages and orphanages. And then as Putin bombed the infrastructure that first winter, we had to transition to sleeping bags and generators to keep lights on in the safe houses. So that's one project. We'll talk about all this in more detail. Convoys in the war zone. So what we do is we have this warehouse. We work with the military. We are pretty famous now. We've been a prominent humanitarian aid organization for 3 years in Ukraine. And the military trusts us. They know who we are and what we're doing. They provide us with the names and locations and the census of the safe houses. Now you can imagine, because of Russian kidnapping, many of these kids are hiding from the kidnapping as well as the bombing. The location of the safe houses is a military secret. That's not something you can call up or look on the internet and say, well, where are the safe houses in Ukraine? Like, that's a very down low thing. There's not a sign on the outside of the building that says safe house, 300 kids inside. It's very much a secret. So the military gives us those locations, and we try to visit on about a 40-day rotation with pallets of food, usually 1 to 2 tons in a delivery. So Rotary Club volunteers go to the warehouse, load up the trucks, they drive the trucks into Ukraine, they deliver the food to a designated safe house or orphanage, and then they hightail it back home. And these are just people like you and me, Polish people, German people, people from all over Europe who know that there are kids in danger that need this humanitarian aid and decide to leave their homes and families, put their lives at risk, and drive these convoys into Ukraine. And every single one of them, just like us, are volunteers. Nobody gets paid. Nobody is making any money on this. We pay our own ways. We've traveled to Ukraine 12 or 13, we've lost track. So the convoys are in 3 languages because you have Polish, predominantly the drivers are Polish. We have us, and we have Ukrainian. And sometimes we have Russian recipients of the aid. So we have at least 3 languages. So every little thing, where are we going, why are we going there, who's going to be there, what do they need, how do we get it there, that all has to be through the chain. It's comical. We take with us the woman right here with the red hair. She's our volunteer translator. She speaks Ukrainian and Polish, and she travels with us on all our convoys. She's, of course, a volunteer, and she's a classical music conductor in her real life. So it's very, very cool, very eclectic group. That's us right on the top right on one of our first winter convoys. You don't plow the roads in a war, right? You've got other things to do. And so one of our aid trucks tipped over into the ditch on the way to a safe house. And we were in a place where there was no electricity. So we're tipped over, we're going to some place we can't tell anybody, and all of a sudden, from nowhere, came trucks and cars with chains and ropes. So what happened was, there was no electricity, so we couldn't see across the landscape that there were houses, because there was no electricity, but they could see our headlights stuck. And so think of the courage it took for them to think, somebody's stuck. I'll go, in a war zone, I'll go see if I can help. And sure enough, they came, and if you know Alex, he wanted to run the show. You're like, no, do it this way, do it that way. But he's speaking English, they're Ukrainian, and the driver's Polish, so it was an absolute circus, and we did eventually get out. And the bottom photo is just a picture of some of our volunteer drivers. They have become dear friends. They've been doing this now with us for almost 3 years, and putting their lives at risk to do this good work for kids. So why do we go to Ukraine if they're going to do it, right? Why should I go and be scared? Well, we feel like we need to reinforce our relationships with these volunteers because we couldn't do any of this work without their love, care, and concern. So we want to say to them, if we're going to ask you to put your lives on the line, we need to be willing to do it too. So we want to let them know how much we appreciate them and that we understand the risk and we're willing to do it ourselves. We want to stay nimble. We want to look at the kids. We want to see where they're living. We want to think, what do they need? Do they need cutlery now? Do they really need toys? Do they need more warm coats? More generators? Is the food the right kind? We're bringing them groat, which is their preferred carbohydrate, canned meat and canned vegetables. Is that the right thing? What else do they need? And we want to be sure we have leak-proof operations. We've raised $4 million so far, so we've purchased about $3.75 million worth of goods, and we want to make sure that The receipts we're getting is the stuff that's actually getting there. It's a war, so a truck full of food, sleeping bags, and generators is a very hot commodity. But using the Rotary volunteers, we go from our hand right into the hands of the kids and the adults taking care of them. But we want to be there and see that change, so we make sure there's no breaks in that delivery system. Yeah. I'll answer any questions at the end that you have about moving about in a war zone, and it's everything you might think about. It's handing your passport over to one of these guys, and I can't speak a lick of Ukrainian, they can't speak any English, and wondering what will happen. We've been pulled over and held with a lot of Ukrainian, very animated conversation, and wondering what is to be our future, and so far everything's gone well. We have, this is a claim to fame, we have delivered 700 trucks of aid into safe houses in Ukraine and returned 700 trucks to Poland without anyone being hurt. Really, really amazing. We've had some trucks break down in a war zone, not a great thing. We build redundancy into our situations to make sure there's always a backup for a flat tire or brakes going out or transmission, which has all happened. So we know it's sometimes scary but always important, and that we have to be as brave as the Ukrainians. We are an unbelievable bunch of people. So that's Alex, and he's invading yet another orphanage kitchen. So, of course, they're very proud of their food. They're very proud of their facilities. They're very proud people. And when Alex wants to go into the kitchen, he's very seldom is it like, oh, come on in. Mostly it's no, don't come in. But he has this way about him of the broad smile and, zeroing on the kitchen equipment and, asking about, well, how do you bake bread for 130 kids every day, and what's the kind of equipment you need? And we think of him and all of us as ambassadors of kindness, and we have eaten a hell of a lot of borscht. That's what they eat, and so that's what we eat. And here Alex is, bringing a smile to somebody's face in the heart of the war.
What's he making there?
Borscht. Red borscht, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's beets, mostly, right? Cabbage, yeah.
And beans?
Don't remember beans.
No beans.
Don't remember beans.
Okay.
I don't remember
Maybe
ever
potatoes.
seeing beans in Ukraine, now that you say it. Seeing peas, carrots. They're not big on vegetables. Like my mother, she'd be like, what? You wouldn't see a sprig of broccoli. You just wouldn't. Okay, so here's where we've been. So you've heard of a lot of these places. So here's Poland up here. So our warehouse is a little south of the D in Poland. Here's Lviv. You've heard of that, right? So there's a western city, mostly considered safe. It's been bombed a couple of times while we've been there, but mostly safe. Rivne up near Belarus. That's a tough place to be because Belarus kind of scares the residents of Rivne by flying low over them, and that starts the air raid sirens. Are they going to bomb? Are they not going to bomb? Belarus hasn't been doing that, but it scares the people, so it's psychological warfare. We met a wonderful young woman in Rivne who she was 17 and she was a cyber warrior. So she and her peer group worked in a basement, basically 24-hour shifts, trying to intercept Russian propaganda coming into Ukraine and sending Ukrainian messages or propaganda into Ukraine or into Russia about what the truth really is. Is Ukraine really being liberated by Russia or not? She was a very inspiring young woman, and it was a privilege to meet her. Kyiv, of course. Cherkasy, we have a bunch of kids in our trauma counseling retreats from Cherkasy. The Dnipro River, of course you've heard of that, and they bombed the dam and flooded the downstream cities. Kherson, this was all occupied by and Mykolaiv and Odessa. These villages in here were occupied for about 6 months by the Russians, and then Ukrainians pushed them back, and these fields now are all mined. This is all agricultural land. You know, the flag of Ukraine is blue over yellow. That's the blue sky, and the yellow sunflower fields or rapeseed fields. Rapeseed is what gets canola oil. Yeah, so miles and miles and miles, forever of agricultural fields of those crops, and
they're the breadbasket.
Yes, they are, of Europe, yes, and Africa actually. And so one of the things we've observed is the Russians have done a very effective job of mining the fields, and then for good measure, like in that particular area near Mykolaiv that I'm speaking about, they mined the fields, and then this was sugar beet country right there, and then blew up the sugar beet factory. So they have no way of making a living now. Even if they demine the fields, the factory's blown up. And living in a village surrounded by mined fields, if you can think about this, right? We drive down this dirt road for miles and miles and miles. It's all marked with potholes, and on both sides of the road, like you can't step out of the vehicle. It's mined everywhere. Then you get to the village, and this particular village, I have a video of this village that's not in my presentation. When the Russians took over this village, they demolished the water and the electric delivery system, so they had no water, no electricity, and no heat for those 6 months. And they were not allowed to leave the village. So they were basically starved to death because they couldn't get food into this village, and they had no electricity or water. And a couple of people tried to escape. They were killed by the Russians. Then Ukraine took back that area, but we're still feeding that particular village because the supply chains haven't been reconstructed, so that village is still not self-sufficient. And then Odessa, you know about Odessa, right? The Tivkin Steppes, the Black Sea. Great little story about Odessa. We were, well, there's 2 stories, but this one is, we were delivering near Mykolaiv. One of our trucks made the food delivery, and remember I said they hightail it back to Poland? So they made the food delivery, these 2 really wonderful driver friends, and the next day the Russians bombed that repository of food that we had delivered. So we know very well we're being watched all the time. We don't ever use our cell phones inside Ukraine because we're going to be tracked. We know the drones are watching us, so we arrange ahead of time when we're at a village to get in there, get everybody there, get the food to them, and get out quickly, because any large gathering is an attraction, whether it's our aid trucks or the people themselves. And then Odessa, we had an experience where if you waddle down to the Black Sea, it's a resort area, gorgeous, now it's all bombed out, resort area. Old town Odessa is still okay, but the resort areas is all bombed, and one of our drivers, Peter, went down to the beach, and they said, well, if you go to the right, you're okay, but if you go to the left, the beach is mined. So he went to the right, and he's sitting there, and all of a sudden this drone flies overhead, and it explodes, and of course he's totally freaked out, and it turns out it was the Ukrainian army practicing on, getting drones, shooting drones down, but he didn't know that, and that's the kind of thing we live with. And then Venetia is a big cherry growing area, right here, Ivano-Frankivsk. And then this is Romania. This is a hot border. people who try to leave Ukraine, particularly, this is like not a flattering thing, but young men who don't want to join the army often try to get into Romania because this border is basically just a bunch of razor wire for miles and miles and miles, and they try to skip down through there. Tough spot. So that's where we've covered. Every trip is about 3,000 miles for us to get from Poland down to, say, Kherson and back. So 6,000 miles round trip.
Do you go straight through Ukraine, or do you go south through Slovakia, Hungary, Romania?
We have done both. We have gone straight across, Rivne, Kyiv, and down, and we've also come back through Ushhorod, which you see there, and Slovakia, and back up. We've never driven through Moldova. It's a little hot there, so we haven't crossed into Moldova. But yes, we've gone back through Slovakia. Crazy, huh? Okay, so here we are. We've been delivering food to these children, and we understand that there's a lot more for them than just feeding them, that they're living through an unimaginable horror. And so we have started these monthly trauma counseling retreats. So they're 3 weeks long. We work with the military, and we ask them to recommend children to us who've lost a father in the war, sometimes a father and a brother, or a father and an uncle. And we take them to Zakopane for a 3-week trauma counseling retreat, and they get to meet other kids who have the same loss. They get group and individual counseling from Ukrainian child psychologists and a Ukrainian MD and 2 Ukrainian teachers, and they network. And they for 3 weeks, for many of them, this is the first time in 3 years that they're not sleeping to the sounds of air raid sirens or bomb shelter or bombing. So some of the kids actually have a hard time adjusting to the silence in the evening because they're so used to the constant, and also the commercial aircraft flying over Poland. At first, the kids have to be cautioned that that is okay. These are just regular old airplanes like the old days when people went on vacation in Ukraine. Don't worry. It's very interesting. So that number's now 960 children have gone through this, and I have a little video to show to get a better sense of that. You're one of the very first people to see this.
Help is also coming from individuals, including a group of Americans.
The group is headed back to Ukraine for another relief trip to visit several orphanages.
We told you earlier this year about the amazing and courageous work by the Hampshire-based group, the Common Man for Ukraine.
Common Man for Ukraine is a volunteer team in partner with the Plymouth Rotary Foundation, a nonprofit out of New Hampshire.
Common Man for Ukraine. Common Man for Ukraine.
Common Man for Ukraine.
Now, more than ever, Ukraine's children need our help.
In Ukraine, there are about 2.5 million internally displaced children. 2.5 million children who are hiding in safe houses, orphanages, abandoned schools, and repurposed monasteries, hiding from kidnapping and bombing.
Це мої троє в нас настроє. Ага, 2 лата.
W ogóle o tym nie myślimy w czasie tej wojny. Jest zadanie do wykonania i to robimy.
There is no place of thinking about the risks involved because there is so much action to be done. So the main focus is on achieving those goals that we set, and we don't think about the risks.
These kids have basic needs. We rent a warehouse in Poland. We stockpile food, sleeping bags, and generators. And every month, volunteer truck drivers load up goods from the warehouse and deliver them to safe houses and orphanages throughout Ukraine.
We see the kids, especially in the safe houses, in the dark, when winter has set in, there's not electricity, and we give them a solar lantern. It lights up their face, it lights up their heart, and it does the same for us. So it's really a chance to bring a little hope to a child, and it is definitely heartwarming for us as givers.
Nie możemy się poddać strachowi.
We cannot surrender to fear because there are people who are waiting for the aid.
What we can do is provide food, warmth, and love. And that's what Common Man for Ukraine does. While we've been feeding these children for the last 2 years, almost 3, we noticed that the trauma that they are suffering is catastrophic. They're living in a war zone. Many of them have lost a parent. And we decided to expand an existing program and provide monthly trauma counseling retreats to children whose fathers have been killed in the war. Each month, we welcome 30 to 35 children from all over Ukraine to our trauma counseling retreats in Zakopane.
The most valuable thing about the mental health retreats for the children is that they get to meet other kids just like them from all over Ukraine who have also lost their fathers or another family member. So they're going through the same grief and the same trauma at the same time. So they build a network of peers at the retreats. They connect with each other during the retreat for the first time. They're meeting each other from all over the country. And then they go home to their home communities and they get to stay in touch with those same peers that are going through the same loss. We also, during the retreats, give them coping skills, and they actually go home with a set of cards that have kind of reminders of the coping skills that they've learned at the retreats. And we even tell the mothers about those coping cards so that the mothers can encourage the kids to use the cards when they're feeling down. And we actually encourage the mothers to use those coping cards as well. America has this history to it where we see struggles in other countries and we chip in, we come together, and we try to alleviate the suffering of others across the globe. So Ukraine is just another example and opportunity that has presented itself where there is somebody that is suffering, a country that is in turmoil, and we're there to bring hope, to bring strength, to bring goods, resources, and some sense of connectedness across the globe.
For decades into the future, they will remember at a really dark time, someone from the United States carrying messages of love brought to them food, warmth, and care.
Pictures that I wish I could tell you, Beanie Babies. I heard somebody say, oh, Beanie Babies. We don't take anything from the United States. It doesn't make any sense. There's tariffs, the shipping is too expensive, it takes too long, and we're buying in such huge quantities. It makes more sense to buy everything in the EU, and we do, except Beanie Babies. The kids absolutely love them, and if you're living out of a couple of plastic bags and you have nothing of your own, and we let the kids choose their own Beanie Babies, we have a big bag, and you take one. It's a magic thing. You saw like that. I don't think most kids in the United States would react that way to a Beanie Baby, but if you're a kid in Ukraine right now in the middle of a war zone, those Beanie Babies are magic, and it's one of those, if you're a Bible reader, the loaves and the fishes story, because we've distributed thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of babies, and the way it works is I'll come home one day and there'll be 3 boxes of Beanie Babies in our garage, shipped from somewhere, California, Virginia, Florida, doesn't matter. Somebody saw our story, saw the Beanie Baby thing, and just are shipping Beanie Babies to us, and it's just a wonderful thing. The other thing you may have noticed is I saw a kid holding up one of these with her little solar lantern. This is a little miracle too. These were made by the Stitches of Love Knitting Ministry, which is a Laconia UCC church group, and they get together and they knit these, they call them peace dolls, and on the back of each tag it says in Ukrainian, we're sending you love and our prayers and hopes for peace and, you know, glory to Ukraine. And these are a big hit, and we also put a peace doll in the cab of every truck as sort of our hope that our trucks will stay safe. Mm-hmm. One heartbreaking little vignette about this is I handed one to a little girl, I think this last trip, and the thing on the back is in Ukrainian, it's also in English, and I said, oh look, you know, here, isn't this great? And she's about 8 years old and she can't read. She couldn't read. And it's a stark reminder, these children for 3 years basically haven't been at school. So if you're 8 years old, you started at 5, you can't read. And if you think of that at a countrywide scale, we've seen all kinds of permutations of the school situation. One model might be that you have a school, but now you have millions of displaced kids coming into your community. So what you do is you only have school part of the time. So maybe 1 week you have school, then the residents of the town go home for online school, maybe if you have electricity, right, and a teacher who's running it. And then the displaced kids come in for school. That's one model. Another one is, well, we only send the number of kids to school who can fit in the school's bomb shelter, because when the air raid sirens come, if you have this many kids but your bomb shelter's only this big, what are you going to do? So you only educate half the kids or a third of the kids at a time, so that you don't exceed the capacity of the bomb shelter, because the bomb shelter thing is constant. Like we often go to a school and the kids are in the bomb shelter. So the repercussions of being at war for years for children, you think of the emotional toll, they may lose a parent, and just the catastrophe of losing your home and your community, and then also to lose that really important education. And I'm a mom. My husband died when my kids were 2 and 7, and I thought that was the most catastrophic thing that could happen. I was devastated for my children, and I realized that I had the benefit of a stable community and hundreds of hands of friends and relatives that helped me raise those children, and that while it was a catastrophe, when I think of these children losing their father and still living in constant fear for themselves, for their remaining parent or caregiver, mother, grandmother, aunt, their homes, their community, their garden, their pet rabbit, like all of it is at risk 24/7. And so while I thought I had a catastrophe, when I think of what these kids are trying to handle, it just pales in comparison to the effects of war on children.
But also,
so here's the common man by the numbers. About 4,500 donors from around the world have donated $4 million. And again, we are just 4 people. We've never run a big project. I never I probably mailed a letter overseas once in my life, but other than that, I couldn't have found Ukraine on the map 3 years ago, and this is all just a belief in the power of good in the universe that we're going to pull this off. We raised 4 million. Our goal is to keep on as long as the kids need us. We have about 80 Rotary volunteers in Europe, primarily in Poland, and as I said, 700 trucks over 1 million miles in a war zone. Pretty amazing. That's about 3,000 tons of food now. The sleeping bags is just a little over that. The generators, thousands of beanie babies and peace dolls. There's a knitting shop in Concord that has its patrons have been knitting for us, and so we have brought many hats and mittens. And then 900, and now it's 960 kids through our trauma counseling retreat. So this is an interesting slide because it's worse now. So we do have more good to do. The waiting list for our trauma counseling camps far exceeds our capacity. Our goal was to raise $2 million. Remember, Alex's $1 billion and doesn't to match it. But the problem is then we went to Ukraine and we met the kids and we saw the need, and we just, you can't turn away. You can't call up and say, well, that was fun, but I need to go play pickleball. You got to keep on, and so we're going to try to maintain our food delivery program, double the capacity of our treats so that we can get 30 kids or 60 kids in a month. And then our two really important growth areas we'd like to do is these kids form these very tight bonds with other kids that have lost their dads, and they're on their phones, really tight relationships. But then they leave and they scatter all across Ukraine. Ukraine's a little bit bigger than Texas, huge country, and we want them to be able to stay in touch with each other, but we want to have a moderated chat room because we want to be able to identify kids that are in acute psychiatric or psychological distress who need intervention. So we want to find a way to supervise those chat rooms so we can catch kids that are in dire straits. And then we want to find a way, to help the moms. What we've done is we've took a sample of kids after they've gone to our retreat. We go 3 to 6 months later to their homes all over Ukraine. Pretty humbling experience to walk into some of these very desperate situations and talk to the kids and say, what was the most valuable part of the retreat? What could we do better? What do you need? How can we support you? And then we ask the moms about what is their experience and feedback of their child going to the retreats and coming back. And what we find is that the moms are absolutely broken. They lost their husband. They get a small stipend from the government, but they really are struggling to make ends meet, working in potato fields, just tough situations. They've got a bunch of kids to raise as single parents, and they're afraid because the bombing is continuing. Where should I go? Should we leave now? Should we go to this city? We talk to kids who have gone from city to city to city because mom thought we'd be safer there than there, and then they bombed there, and then they went to another. Just awful situations. And so we feel that the moms need that trauma counseling boost. And I know very well from my own experience that 3 weeks doesn't solve anything. It doesn't make the tragedy less or make it go away, but we hope to give these kids some rudimentary tools to face the road ahead. We think in the longer term, if you think about who these kids are, we hope Ukraine prevails and that these are the children that are going to grow up and make decisions about a free and independent Ukraine, and we want them to be as strong and capable as they can be. Now, USAID, have we read about that? Mm-hmm. So USAID has ceased all funding. They had invested about $2 billion into Ukraine for humanitarian aid. Their humanitarian aid was mostly propping up some schooling, repairing hospitals, and helping to repair the grid when it would be bombed. Well, now all that is gone. So if you think about the importance of what we're doing when USAID is gone, It makes our job even more important, and we're a very small fish in a very, very big pond. So Rotary is making this happen, and we're grateful to them. These are the Rotary clubs in the general area that you may know of that have provided some kind of support to us, have held fundraisers for the lake. I don't want to ask for money, but I would ask you to share our story, because I think right now, more than ever, understanding the story of the children of war in Ukraine is really important. Our newspapers will tell you about the number of tanks, the number of missiles, the number of drones, the number of dead soldiers, the number of injured soldiers on both sides. Seldom do they talk to you about the real effects of the children of war in Ukraine. And so if you can share that story to build awareness here in the United States of what is needed over there and why it's important to support the kids of Ukraine, that's a blessing to us. I do want to tell you a few quick stories about some of the fun things people have done, just because it inspires me so much. I can't write $1 million check like Alex, but people have been so creative. We've had cornhole tournaments, a ukulele concert, spaghetti dinners, of course. It was Miss New Hampshire that did the cornhole tournament. There was a boy in Massachusetts who saw our story and made construction paper flags, and he sold them in his school, blue and yellow flags, and he raised $48, and he sent us $48 in an envelope. And we called the Boston TV station from where he was and told them the story. And this is the magic of this whole project, is that the WBZ ran that story, and people donated in the tens of thousands of dollars because they were inspired by this little boy who said, well, I wanted to help feed those kids. It took $44 to feed a kid for a month in Ukraine, so I raised $48. And people said, hey, if Robbie can do that, then I can send you a check. We got 3 $5 bills from a convent in New Hampshire, and just goes on and on. And then, of course, somebody gave us an anonymous $250,000. So soup to nuts, people are doing what they can, whether it's a Beanie Baby or a knitted doll or an anonymous check. People who believe in what we're doing and know that we're all volunteers and this aid is all getting directly to these kids are donating, and we very much appreciate it. I can answer any questions you might have. Yeah?
How do you go about recruiting volunteers?
So the problem is we don't need any volunteers over there. We're actually overrun with volunteers who want to drive trucks in. They feel like that seems like a really tangible way to help, and so we have lots of volunteers that want to drive trucks. In the United States, the work we need done is the ugliest work there is, just raising money. So I have a hard time. I get calls all the time from people who say, I want to go load boxes, or I want to, but unless you speak Ukrainian or Polish, it's really, you really can't help. And I don't like raising money, but that's really what they need. We take the money here, we ship it to a nonprofit Rotary Club in Zamość, Poland. They purchase all the goods and they hire the school psychologist, the child psychologist, the MD, and the teachers to do the trauma counseling centers. So it's really not, there's not much of a way to volunteer except to volunteer to host a fundraiser or do something here that allows us to deliver the aid.
Are there any organizations that also bolster or booster what you do? Like, are there partnerships with the Red Cross or other charities that kind of help enable some of these things?
So we literally were in negotiations with USAID for a grant when the new administration changed that thing. We have corporate matching where companies will match employee donations. We've had donations from various car dealerships, other large companies. The Jamestown Ukraine Relief Projects have given us money. There's something called Brave Selections in Rhode Island. If you check them out, they import Ukrainian wine and hard cider, and they're doing a big fundraiser for us. We're applying for a grant from, we're going to get a grant from a company called Jabil, which is some big tech company. Money comes from all over. An electric company in New Jersey wrote one day. I was in the airport headed to Ukraine, and I get this email like, "Hi, my name is so and so, and we're deciding our support for Ukrainian projects, and we want to donate $20,000. Can you tell me more about your efforts there?" And I wrote back thinking, is this a scam? Because we've had plenty of scams. I mean, that's lots of scams. Like, send me $100,000 and I'll. And so I wrote back, oh, this is what we do and this is how we do it. I'm thinking, I don't know. And by the time we landed in Warsaw, they had said, well, their usual limit for donating is $20,000, but they were going to give us $40,000 because they wanted to fund one complete trauma counseling retreat, and so they did. How did they hear about us? Probably from somebody in this room. I don't know. We don't know, but that's what it takes, is everybody just sharing our story. Who knows? You might know somebody at the New York Times or anything else. Any questions? Yeah.
Well, thanks for what you all are doing. I had a couple questions. One was, when you go into a village, how long? I know you're dropping off food and sleeping bags and generators. How long do you stay in that village?
Not more than a couple hours. Because we know we're getting watched and we don't want to be anywhere very long.
And when you go, have you been to a village and like a year later or 2 years later, go back to the same village and see how the kids and the families are doing?
It's horrible. I will tell you a story. There's this, I have a great video of the first Christmas we went, the first Christmas convoy, which would have been 2022. We went to an abandoned monastery that had no electricity. It was where we got stuck in the snow. No electricity, no heat. It had no infrastructure. It had a few tables, but it didn't have any beds. It didn't have any play equipment. It was cold inside. It was snowing outside, no heat. It was about 38 degrees inside. The walls were all damp. I can remember the floors being really slippery, and there was this girl in a pink hat. It was a hot pink hat with blue glasses, and she was so proud because she spoke a little bit of English and she wanted to talk to us. And I talked to the girl with the pink hat. Great, whatever, it was wonderful. And I walked away, got in, drove away. The next year, almost to the day, December 17th, I was back in that same safe house just by sheer, we didn't plan it. There we were in the same safe house. And there was the girl in the pink hat. And my heart was torn. One side of me, the mom of me, oh, she's safe. A year later, isn't that great? She's safe. But then, she's been here a whole year. She's been here hiding away from her family, wondering about her town and her grandma and her house and her school, and missing play dates and trips to the mall, and never played a soccer game, and all those foundational experiences we want for all our kids. She has spent in this cold, dark, horrible situation. Unbelievable. She's still there. She's still in that same. And that model is interesting. In that safe house, what they did was several villages had taken their progeny, basically, the village's kids, and sent 3 moms on a train to this place, to this safe house. and several villages did the same thing. So they had 8 adults and about 130 kids, right? The kids have been staying there since the war began. The moms leave every 2 or 3 months to go back to wherever home is. This was Kharkiv that this particular couple of moms I was thinking about. And so, I asked them about, well, what about school? Well, we do the best we can. Here's 130 kids and just moms, right? This is not teachers, this is not qualified people to be teaching these kids. And I asked about psychologists. They said that the local social service organization sent a psychologist once a month for 130 kids. And this just brings you to your knees. They're doing the best they can under really rough circumstances, and the kids are gonna be paying this price for decades to come.
One other quick question. Yeah. Do you know of anyone else besides the Common Man for Ukraine, any other organizations from anywhere else in the world that are helping like you are?
There's a few. They're small. We have seen Red Cross there. We've seen USAID there. World Central Kitchen is there, absolutely. But they do a very different thing. They provide a hot meal to you in this time and right here, now. Here is your hot meal. We provide pallets of food to be cooked for kids. Not a meal at a time, but pallets at a time. They just do a very different thing. Other than that, all the organizations we've met have been very, very small. There's something called New Hampshire for Ukraine, which is a guy named Brian Nolan and some buddies of his doing fantastic work, but very small scale. He has a truck over there. He buys food in Europe. He drives the truck into Ukraine, does the best he can, comes back out, does it again and again and again. But we don't see any huge organizations over there.
Thank you.
Wish I could say different.
So I noticed that when you had the map there that all of the places that you visited were on the west side of the river. Right. So is it just
the rest is Russian occupied, and we just can't get in there. Yeah. We get kids out of there for our trauma counseling retreats, but we don't go in there. We feel a responsibility towards our volunteers' safety. Yeah. So everything else on the east there is occupied. The Common Man for Ukraine is a really great testament of what everyone doing a little bit can do together. Alex was right. Lots of people wanted to help, but they didn't know how, and Common Man for Ukraine gave people a chance to learn how to help and actually do it. From $5 to $1 million, every little bit matters. We can't do it all for all the kids in Ukraine. The loss is catastrophic, but for that one child, you give them that Beanie Baby, or you give them 3 weeks of retreat, safe, fresh air and exercise and peers and counseling. It matters for that kid. So we try not to get overwhelmed by the enormity of the need, and just do a little bit every time, as much as we can for as long as we can. Quote Jimmy Carter. Thank you for listening. Thanks.